Why women do fire differently, and that's actually a superpower. Welcome back to Sugar Mama's Fireplay, the podcast where we explore all things financial independence, early retirement, and long term financial freedom. And we do so with honesty, empathy, and hopefully a touch of elegance. Today, I am so excited to be joined by Michelle, who's actually previously been on my YouTube channel many years ago. She's now a self-employed mother of two who, along with her husband, has been building a life of freedom, purpose, and balance through the FIRE movement, a really powerful lifestyle movement. Now, in this conversation that we're about to unpack, we're going to explore why women often approach FIRE, that is financial independence, retire early, differently from men, and actually how that difference can be a really powerful advantage. We're going to talk about the lifestyle design, parenting with purpose, money and marriage, and how to build financial freedom with children actually in the picture, not in spite of them. Whether you're starting from scratch or you're already on your way to FIRE, Michelle's story is going to inspire you to think more intentionally about your own financial future and to help you realize you can absolutely build a life filled with meaning, freedom, time, and of course, wealth. Good morning, Michelle. How are you?
Hi, Canna. How are you? I'm really well, thanks.
Now, I want to get straight into this. Can we go back to the beginning and start with your own fire story? Like, what was it that initially, I guess, was the catalyst or inspired you and your husband, of course, to pursue financial independence and create an early retirement? Because you've been doing this for a long time and you would have been a bit of a pioneer. No one would have even heard of that concept, 10 years ago.
Yeah, so I think for me, it was just not wanting to sort of follow the status quo. I wasn't happy in my work at the time, it was in a full-time role. And I sort of knew there had to be a better way, or at least I hoped that there was. And when I found out that you could replace your salaried income with investment income by just being proactive with your money earlier, that was a very appealing concept to me. And my colleague who I worked with at this company that I wasn't very happy at and had been with for a long time because they had a bit of they call them the golden handcuffs, but I was a very early employee, and I had an ESOP plan that was vesting over very unfavorable to the employee timeline. So it was really drawn out. So I was kind of really stuck at this company that I wasn't happy at. But I worked with this guy who's super clever, really smart, and he told me about the FIRE movement, and it had really taken off in the States. And it had actually been pioneered by a guy called Mr. Money Mustache. And I was like, this is amazing and so transferable to Australia. And I need to start doing this. And he was sort of doing it, but he was very quiet about it. He didn't really tell people. And he was saying to me that he'd been doing it for the last 10 years and he was pretty much on track to go down to part-time the next couple of years if he wanted to. And he was in his late 20s at the time. So I just thought that was incredible. And
Yeah.
I started from there. So that really was where it all sort of began for me.
And what was the first investment that you made?
Oh gosh, I think my very first investment was Vanguard, and I think it might have been probably if that's probably VAS.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So that's the Australian Share Fund.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So going back to sort of women and where women fit in the FIRE movement, you've mentioned that women, they approach FIRE differently than men, and I'm inclined to agree. But what would you say, from your opinion, are the key differences that you've picked up? Is it mindset? Is it strategy? Is it motivation? Or is it a mix of the two? Like, how do you see the key differences between men and women in this incredibly powerful, inspiring movement?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think there's two things that I've thought about this a lot. I think that it boils down to. The first thing is that I think that women fundamentally want autonomy and security. I personally, and this is like a lot, I speak a lot to other Australian FIRE followers, but also in the States and actually the UK, Europe, kind of globally. We're not really interested in conquest. We're not interested in shooting the lights out, beating the market. We don't want to pick unicorn stocks. I don't want to day trade. I don't want to sit at my computer all day. In fact, quite the opposite. I want to build a nest egg that makes me feel safe and secure. And when I've dug really deep into this, it often comes back to feeling trapped. the concept of sort of untrapping. At the time when I started, I was in a bad job that I felt very trapped in, as I've said, due to this ESOP, this employee share component, which had just very extremely unfair vesting terms. I had been at this company from its infancy, so I was sort of there to see these shares vest so that I could sort of take them and go, but I was really stuck there, and I had a proper it was a real narc CEO, like, the work was really hard, super long hours, I just wasn't happy.
Yeah.
Um, so it was this feeling of just like, there has to be another way, but, like, work can't always look like this, and at the time, I didn't know that it wouldn't, but that was my frame of reference for what work would be, and I thought if I'm gonna stay in tech startups, it's always gonna be like this. But over the years, this concept of sort of feeling trapped and wanting to move away from that also popped up again once I had kids, because I started to feel a little bit trapped in motherhood, and I was trying to juggle the unpaid labor of that alongside the paid labor of doing an actual, paid job. I've also been in, aside from that, bad situations while traveling or on nights out, and I've had to make swift decisions to leave. So I think for women, we want to be able to have choices and freedom to navigate systems that haven't always served us equally.
Mm.
So that's the first thing. I think the second thing that makes women a little bit different is that we tend to invest more in line with personal values. So when my husband and I talk about you know, what our next stock pick or index fund investment might be, for example, he will often look at performance. He will look at what he's read, so what's topical. Whereas that matters a lot less to me over what the company represents. So I, for example, look at things like ESG rating, I look at performance reports, I look at whether a company's been ethically screened. I always look at the female representation on a board, because to me that's a really good indicator as to whether they'll perform well. And I think the research shows that women tend to invest this way and in a more consistent way, albeit a bit later than men, whereas men tend to not follow a trend as much because they're sort of more volatile in their decision making. So I think, at least in my experience, and I suppose anecdotally, what I've sort of gleaned from talking to other female investors is that those are the two sort of key differences.
Yeah, I speaking from experience, obviously as a financial planner, working with men and women, um, I completely agree with that. Like that's very much what I've seen. That kind of calm, rational, methodical approach by women, and then men would have sort of a bit more, I guess, captivated by the opportunity, the upside, and perhaps maybe a little bit more. I wouldn't say irrational, but a little bit more fast moving in making those decisions. Now, coming to the topic of motherhood, for me, when I became a mother, I suddenly went from being, I guess, very driven and motivated to probably having a greater desire, motivation towards security and stability. How would you say, becoming a mother, because you've got two young children, has, I guess, impacted, or how your relationship with money has perhaps evolved in this transition, and how has that impacted your FIRE goals?
Yeah, I think it made me realize that I wanted to go back to work, because I'd spent a lot of time feeling that work was the problem.
Mm,
And actually, work wasn't the problem. It just wasn't that I wasn't doing purposeful work.
yeah.
Um, so when I had my first son, he was very late to daycare because I don't think he went to daycare until he was 2.5.
Mm,
Um, and that's for a few reasons, but the primary one was that COVID happened right as he was born. So through most of his infancy, everything was closed, and we just spent a lot of time together and indoors. So I really craved going back to work, which was very unexpected for me. And when I did, when he started daycare, I was so renewed. I felt this really renewed sense of purpose and identity in myself. And that was a really nice shift that was very unexpected. I was really laser focused on what I wanted, which was also writing a nonfiction book, which had been on the back burner for years because, quote unquote, I never had time.
yeah.
Yeah, so, the difference, I suppose, in work ethic as well is that my ability to multitask and balance is insane. I'm very grateful, and I'm hyper aware of the very limited hours I have for things. So I'm much more efficient with them. I also don't care as much about things. But money wise, I don't think really it's all that different. We've always been low and slow investors. That really hasn't changed. The security piece has always been a very strong theme. But I suppose what has changed is what we want to do when we retire. So my husband and I always had this sort of like open-ended goal of like maybe we'll travel. That would be nice. I don't really know what we would do if we weren't working.
Mm,
But now we have this dream to buy a big camper van, do lots of traveling with the kids, maybe work part time
yeah.
on the road as we go. That's definitely sort of a new development.
Now, on that topic of working part-time, you've made that conscious decision that when you hit that, retirement, it's not actually a, hang up your shoes and go fishing and never work a day in your life ever again. It's more about working part-time indefinitely. Why is that important to you now? Like that you want this, your retirement is going to include working part-time. What's changed there?
Yeah, I think I want my kids to see me working. Like, it's important that I think that they do, and I think I'm a better mother when I have that balance in my life, to be honest with you.
Oh, I
Um,
couldn't agree more. Sometimes I cartwheel out the door to go to work and have a conversation and use my brain, and I completely agree. Letting kids see you work hard instills a really great work ethic for them
Totally.
to follow. It's invaluable, and parents often say to me like, "How do I teach my kids how to do money?" I'm like, "Well, they watch you work. Like that in itself is a financial lesson, and a message of wisdom and dedication and perseverance." So yeah, I completely agree with you.
Yeah, it's really important. Like, I come back and my cup is full, and I just have more. It doesn't actually drain me, it fills it up, and I have more to pour into them, which I don't think I would have if it's too important. I realize it's too important to me. Like, I thought I hated working, and I don't. I actually love working. I just didn't like the work that I was doing for who I was doing it for. And now that I'm self-employed, I pick who I want to work with, and I have a lot of flexibility around my hours. It's totally changed the game for me. I feel very lucky.
And also, I think when I mean, I'm the same as you. I don't want to just retire and stop everything. I want to keep using my brain. I want to keep stay relevant. I want to understand what's going on in the world. I want to do charity work. I want to continue on building great relationships and connections with people. So, and that's all contributes towards wealth. The
Yeah,
authentic wealth and richness.
totally.
Now, you've obviously weathered periods of, no savings due to obviously higher interest rates that we've all experienced, and, life events, like maternity leave. Like, how have you weathered these storms or, periods of time in your life, and actually still managed to stay completely committed and resilient through this?
Yeah, I think, I mean, I had Hypermesis Gravida, which is just a grueling, debilitating condition, and I unfortunately had it with both of my kids from very early on in both pregnancies, and it meant that I was effectively rendered completely bedbound
Mm.
from, like, week 6 or something up
Oh my,
until I delivered both of them. So
oh,
it didn't go until I delivered the placenta, basically.
wow.
Um, yeah, and it meant that I had to turn off my life, like, just from one day to the next. Like, one day I could sort of function, I felt a bit nauseous, and then the next it was just no, like, it was awful.
Mm.
Um, and I think that time there's a huge emotional burden that comes with, like, a condition like that anyway, and trying to
Yeah.
and pregnancy is difficult, some women have great pregnancies, and that's wonderful, but I think the majority have some level of difficulty with a pregnancy because it is a very difficult thing to do, is to create another human or multiples.
Yeah.
And I often think so I didn't have to worry about money during that time because of the decisions that I had made,
Mm.
which meant that I could focus on rest and recovery. And I remember thinking distinctly, like, this would be so much more difficult if I was still having to try to get up and go to work, or even budget and manage my money from bed,
Oh,
right? Because, how much more difficult would that have made that time in my life, and how much more stressful? I think, even when I was going through those times, I felt really grateful for past me and the decisions that I had made, because it was allowing current me to focus on the rest and recovery. And that kind of kept me going for like, this is why I do this. So I may have more periods. Like if I continue to have more children, I will inevitably have pregnancies like this again, or something else could happen in my life. And, I could deal with a chronic illness or have an unexpected injury, or something could happen where I need to take time out of the traditional workforce, and I will have my investment in my passive income to see me through. And I think that's really what kept me feeling very resilient during those times, because it was like I've made these decisions for a reason. I'm seeing them come to fruit now, and they may have to come to fruit again in the future, and that feels good.
Yeah. Now, like many families, like men and women, feel really overwhelmed, particularly right now with the rising cost of living, and it makes it really hard to save, let alone invest, whilst raising children. From someone who, as a mother with two young children, who is actively involved in the FIRE movement, what would be some, realistic and practical strategies that other people could use that you can recommend that helped you get to where you are today?
Yeah, it's a that's a hard question to answer, because I think we're in such an unprecedented time in terms of with the current cost of living. Like that's impacted us massively as well. The interest rates on our, like, we are used to saving huge amounts of money,
Mm.
like up to 70% of our income. And this was probably pre-children, after having children, but
Yeah.
pre-children we were doing that. So then that definitely went down when we had kids to a much more reasonable figure. Whatever we could had in surplus, it might have been 20% or 30% on a good month, to all of a sudden, not even, like, barely breaking even, and in some months not breaking even at all, digging into the offset savings in order to
Mm.
cover the shortfall of the mortgage. And that, and if that's us, I can only imagine, you know, the situation that other folk on potentially lower incomes, or not with the sort of financial noose that we have, the
Mm.
position that they were in, it would have been very difficult. But I think the thing that I always go back to is like, what the little that you can do, it really is a snowball effect. So it might not be, if you have some disposable income that you can free up and save and invest, that's fantastic. But I think some people sometimes fall into the mindset of like, well, if I can't do everything with grandeur, I might as well not do anything at all. And I really don't think that's the case. I think it's building wealth is a slow burn. At least it has been for us. It's slow and slow, lots of small incremental decisions, lots of conscious spending. Making those little choices do add up. So what little things that you do that are realistic for you in your day to day, in your life, in your finances, to kind of move the needle on the long term goal of wealth, right? And that might be something small like unsubscribing from a few marketing emails that you otherwise wouldn't, or finding something else that is a less expensive way to get the dopamine that you need.
Mm.
Um,
And a
right.
more authentic, sustainable dopamine hit as well.
Yeah, totally. Like the little, it's just, you just don't give up. Like, just don't give up through it. Just something little, small, that it's the slow burn, the small build.
Yeah, I and even just, opening up a savings account and transferring $1, that in itself is the birth of your FIRE strategy. And you might be just transferring $1 and think, what's the point? Well, guess what? Tomorrow might be $2, and the following day might be $5, and the following day might be $10. Then this is the whole principle behind the $1,000 project, is just small amounts of money, how it can really do quickly add up, and then you can do something intentional with that money, for your FIRE journey. Now, you've talked about previously your son and how you've included him in your, conversations around money and FIRE. How does that work? What does that look like?
Yeah, I think the big thing. I actually wrote a blog on this, and I think I can't even remember what it's called. I think it's something about like your top lessons to teach kids early or something on my blog. But the big one that I think has resonated a lot with my mum friends, particularly, is the phrase you can have. And there's a woman who runs a podcast that's called Afford Anything, but the key tagline is you can have anything but not everything.
Yeah.
And that's something that's really like had to come into play quite a lot as he's grown, because he will ask for everything, and children don't really have a very, money is infinite to them.
Yeah, which
And
is so innocent and beautiful, but obviously comes with problems further down the track if it's not taught.
totally, and I have to, like, I don't want to, no mother wants to deprive their child of anything or a nice experience, but I will often have moments where I have to get down on his level and say, "Okay, so you've asked for a few things. I know this is a really overwhelming place for you because you can see all of these things that you want, or we're walking past shops that have these great displays in the window, but we have a budget and we can't go over that budget. So you have a little bit of money left in your budget, but you've got to pick, and that means that you might be able to only have one thing or two things, or if you've spent the money and we've already used it for that week, then no things. But you can have anything, but you can't have everything. So you've got to be discerning in what you pick." And that is like, we've done that from when he was young, and that's been really helpful, because my mum friends, when we do play dates, will often say to me now, like, "Oh, he just accepts that when you say it to him." Like, my kiddo would have had a screaming tantrum for 3 hours over this, and I'm like, "Oh, no, we've had those," but he now, like, we've definitely had those in the past, but he now really understands that concept, like, "Okay, I spent my money." I think that's a really key thing. The other
Mm,
thing was around language around money, so I say things to him like, "You are my best investment." Um, and then I use phrases like, "We'll always have enough," in our sort of everyday language, because I want him to know that our attitude towards money is really calm and it's balanced. Money is not who we are, it's what we have, and it comes and goes, it flows.
mm.
So I think those are kind of the key things.
Yeah. And, talking about, I guess touching back on that whole dopamine topic, teaching kids about delayed gratification
Yes.
and, doing the research, understanding difference between quality and quantity, and, thinking about, okay, if I'm going to buy this toy, I want it to last me a really long time. I don't want it to fall apart, or I don't want to fall out of love with it, or it no longer be, cool with my friends. Those conversations are really powerful, and it means that that dopamine hit is actually one that's sustainable. It's not about a quick hit. So and people don't realize actually how powerful these conversations are. They cost nothing. They don't involve you having to do a complicated investment strategy, but what you are teaching your children will serve them for the rest of their lives.
Totally. He actually had he's with this little modeling agency, and he had a shoot with a big department store, and
Oh,
they get paid for that, obviously. Um, and I said to him, "If you want to do this, then you'll get this money, and it's this much per hour. But the money, and you can have a think about what you want to buy with that money." And he straight away was like, "Nintendo Switch. I want a Nintendo Switch." I thought, "Okay, well, you're probably going to have enough of that." But so he did the shoot. It was great. It takes a long time for the money to land in your account once you finish a job like that. And so every time we'd walk past a tech store, he'd go, "Yeah, but I earned that money. That's mine, and I want to buy my Nintendo Switch." And then I had to keep saying to him, "Yeah, we have to wait for the money to land, and when it does, you'll be able to get the cash out." And that was a sweet day for him when that finally came through. We got that cash out. He went and paid for it. It was like, he actually said to me, "This was worth the wait." And I think that's pretty self-aware for a 5-year-old to say. Managing the screen time is a separate issue, but
oh, that's gorgeous. Um, can I move on to your marriage, if that's okay, and like ask you, how do you and your husband stay aligned when it comes to making those big financial decisions, and also balancing the work life balance? Because I feel like women wear so much of the family life admin at the expense of their career paths.
yeah, I feel like I'm really lucky, because I started on this journey much earlier than he did. And he wasn't, the idea of saving a huge portion of your income and investing it was not, you know, preferable to him in the early days. So I did it alone for quite a while.
Mm,
But he saw the massive gains that I achieved on my own in the beginning, and I think he just really respected that. He really respected the research that I'd done into the FIRE lifestyle. So he's pretty converted, I think, and he generally, I think the respect is the key thing here, because he lets me lead on a lot of this stuff.
Mm.
And he kind of comes along for the ride, and I think and he kind of understands my decision making a lot. And if we need to sort of hash it out and have a conversation about it, we will. And that's not to say that I manage everything, because he is certainly like has input into things. But I think where we work is that I utilize his strengths in a different way. So he loves Excel, that's his like thing, and it's a really powerful tool for us for tracking our wealth. So I let sort of him take that aspect of it off my plate and him manage that, and then I sort of do all of the picking and the research into the companies that we invest in, or the property that we buy, for example. And he kind of, that's just kind of a dynamic that works for us.
Yeah, so you, I guess, leveraging off each other's strengths and that
Yeah.
concept of divide and conquer.
Yeah, and if something that I pick or want to do doesn't quite work for him, like, he says that, and then we just let it breathe, we give it some time.
Mm, mm. Oh, I mean, that's perfect and beautiful, and the teamwork makes the dream work. So,
Totally.
and I think what it's interesting you say this, because I was listening to a podcast a couple of weeks ago, and it was talking about uh, vulnerability, and knowing that, making peace with the fact that you could do it on your own, but if you have the opportunity to team up with someone, you're going to conquer more, and you're going to conquer things faster. And there's nothing wrong or right between either of them, but I know as myself, I've had a lot of trouble, I guess, uh, letting go of my independence as much. Like, whilst I'm financially independent of Tom, I've also had to kind of, at times, I guess, sit through some uncomfortableness, or some maybe self-imposed limitations that I put on myself about working together as a team. It hasn't been
Mm.
an easy transition, and every now and again we do hit personal blocks that I need to sort of sit on and work through. But it is also scary as well. I think opening up and going, all right, we're going to combine our financial journeys and stories, and build something together. And keep what we've done previously in the past as our own individually. What would you say, from your experience, are the biggest misconceptions you've had to yourself unlearn about fire, or building wealth as a woman, as a partner, and of course as a mother?
Oh, that's a great question. That women can't invest, that we don't make good investors. So I want to use a terrible swear word, but I won't. I'll use a PG one. It's utter crap. So
Yeah.
early on, I used to, and I've told the story a few times on sort of different interviews that I've done. Um, when I started out on this journey, probably just due to the personality type that I have, I was like, how do I learn from, I want to learn from people who have built large sums of wealth. And they would be, well-known investors in particularly the sort of the Australian market, so Sydney, where I was living, or CEOs. So I'm going to invite them out for lunch, and I'm going to pick their brains. And a lot of them said yes to that, which is odd when an 18-year-old, spunky 18-year-old puts an email in your inbox inviting you out. But they said yes. A lot of them happened to be men. And I just took a lot of them out for lunch and was like, how did you make the money that you've made, or what were the decisions that you made that have led you to where you are? And a lot of them, not all of them, but I would say that like over 50% of them, particularly the ones that were men, told me that women didn't make good financial decisions. Like, I remembered that being a theme that kept popping up. I wish I could go back, the version
Well,
that I
you
am now,
you
to the
proved
younger
them
me.
wrong.
I know, but I wish I could tell them that, I wish I could go back and say that. But anyway, I was a lot younger then. But I remember thinking like, no, that can't be true. I just don't think that's true. And I know that's not true now. And I think that that's a huge misconception, that women are too shy, or we're not good with money. And it's just crap.
I think a lot of it's confidence, and
Mm.
then behind the confidence is a lack of financial literacy, and that's obviously why I'm so passionate about educating, because when you can educate, you create clarity, and you create a sense of purpose and direction, and you can follow the instructions, and you can tweak and change the instructions as you go through your financial journey. So, I think once you give someone the gift of financial literacy, and a bit of faith in themselves, off you go. Like, the sky really is the limit. Whether you're male or female, whether you're young or old, or whether you come from poverty or you come from extreme wealth, like, financial education is essential. It's as important as understanding the importance of what to eat and the importance of understanding the value of exercise and moving your body for long-term
Yeah.
health and longevity. As we wrap up today's episode, what I always like to ask, like land or conclude with, what is the one piece of advice? And so my question to you is, what is the one piece of advice you would give another woman listening to this conversation right now who is feeling a little bit maybe behind financially or feeling, as I said, insecure, lacking in faith and confidence about FIRE, but actually does have a little bit of a burning curiosity deep within? What would you say to that one woman listening right now to this conversation?
Or follow that instinct. Yeah, I think I couldn't agree more on your last point, and I think actually to that last point, if you look at, there's a lot out there, and a lot of it's US based, but there is a lot of reading material out there from female bloggers who have retired early or are on the path to it, and women have these stories, you know, tell the tales of these women who have retired early from like very little or nothing or even massive amounts of debt where they otherwise wouldn't have been able to. And it might only be that they've changed their story so that they can retire like 2 to 3 years or 5 years earlier than they normally would have been able to, or even that they just retired at the normal age that someone should retire at, when the alternative, if they continued on their previous path, would have been that they would have been working until they were in their 80s or, physically unable to work anymore. So they've changed that story for themselves by, following that instinct or, indulging that curiosity to say, like, I don't want to live like this anymore, and I don't need to, because there are options for me. And it goes back to that, little and often thing that you start with. It really is a snowball effect, but
Mm.
go with it, follow the instinct.
And, there are wake-up calls, all around us, signs to say, come on, pull your head in, come on, make a change, come on, you can do this, come on, just get started. But we just need to learn to act on those signs and make them our catalysts and start our financial journey, like birth it, as we talk about motherhood. Well, look, Michelle, I can't thank you enough for sharing your story, your insights, and of course your journey with so much honesty and just practical wisdom. So for everyone who's listening, hearing Michelle's story, it reminds us that financial independence isn't about retiring early or even actually hitting a particular number. It's really about intentionally designing a life that feels rich to you, feels deeply meaningful, and is aligned to the values in your life that make you feel alive, happy, and resilient. And to every single woman listening to this episode, I hope that you actually now have a bit of clarity and that very important confidence to know that you are worthy of this path as well. You can pave this path for yourself and be an incredible example for your loved ones and everyone else around you. So whether you're parenting or you're pivoting or you're just planting those first seeds for your own FIRE dream, please know that it is never too late. You are never behind, and you absolutely have the power to not only change your financial future, but to leapfrog and make up for any lost time that you think you may have created. Now, everyone who listened to this, thank you so much for your time. And again, thank you to Michelle. If this episode has resonated with you or you think someone needs to hear this, can you do me a massive favor and send it to them right now? And if you have a spare moment, I'd also greatly appreciate it if you can leave me a rating and review. I will link in the podcast notes, obviously, Michelle's blog, and so you can get in contact with her whenever you need. But in the meantime, of course, keep that financial fire burning bright within. And I look forward to catching up with you next Monday on SugarMamma's Fireplay.